Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Red Power Hour. It's been a while since Elena and I have sat down to record an episode, and also since we released one. So we're really excited to be back here on the mic. I'm Melanie Yazzie, co host of Red Power Hour. Elena, I'll just pass it to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll just get right into it.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm Elena Ortiz, calling in from Ogapoge Owinge, and I'm really excited about this episode talking about sinners, because I did not go into this movie thinking it was going to be sort of as mind-blowing as it was. I thought it was a run-of-the-mill vampire movie, and I love vampire movies. I love horror movies, but I love vampire movies, and I have for years and years, because vampires can really stand in as a metaphor for almost anything. And so I went into this movie thinking it's going to be, a vampire movie, a horror movie, and came out of it sort of mind blown, and went home and wrote about 5 pages of notes, and then texted Melanie and said, "Have you seen Sinners? We have to do Sinners," which is, for those of you who haven't seen it, is a film by Ryan Coogler, who did, he's the writer and director on this film. And he also did both Black Panther movies, the Black Panther and then Wakanda Forever. And he's done all the Creed movies. So Michael Jordan seems to be a favorite actor of his to work with. And he does an amazing job in this.
A truly amazing job.
Truly amazing job. And I think I'll just say one thing about like the first 15 minutes, because it was really interesting. The film, the way it starts out, is in a church, and the young man comes in. He's clearly been beaten up. He's got scratch marks across his face, and he's taken in by his father, who's the preacher. And there's this whole scene where the congregants are all in white, and it's this, crazy church scene, and they welcome him in and tell him he's going to be fine, and his sins will be forgiven and all this. And then it immediately switches to a scene, and you're not quite sure what's going on, other than there's this person who's being chased, and he gets to the door of this like rundown cabin and knocks on the door and begs to be let in. And the woman who opens the door invites him in, and then cuts to a scene of these native guys on horseback, and they go to the cabin and they say, you're in danger. You need to, get this guy out of your house. And the woman rebuffs them, clearly doesn't want to have anything to do with a group of Indians. So he gets back on his horse, and he's speaking to his comrades there in Choctaw. And I just was kind of stunned, like, whoa, what is this? And they're speaking to each other, and the subtitles on the screen. It's getting dark. The sun is going down. We need to get out of here. Excuse me. And so they give up and they ride off. I found out later from the Mississippi Band of Choctaws that the actors were Choctaw. The outfits were period correct Choctaw outfits, and they were actually speaking Choctaw. And I thought,
wow.
So Ryan Coogler did a solid, considering how much we all hated Wakanda Forever for like butchering the Maya people. He came back, and what was going through my head was, oh my God, he actually listened. Like, we told him his depiction of Native people was horrible, and so that scene was both sort of a redemption for him in my eyes, but also, as I thought more about it, what was going through my head was, of course the Native people would know in the early 1900s, probably way before that, if there were vampires around, that there were vampires in their midst. Of course they would know. It's their land. They know everything that goes on their land. And of course they would be the first presence that we saw trying to do good, trying to figure this out. So that to me set a tone, and it was all like, woo, woohoo from that point on. I just, yeah, that
Huh.
movie.
That's interesting. I hadn't really so I full disclosure, I just saw this movie last night. I know it came out on April 18th, so it was like about a month and a half ago. I had a crazy end of the semester, so I did not get a chance to see this. And Elena just texted me yesterday. She's like, "Hey, we're recording tomorrow. Have you seen Sinners?" And I was like, "Oh shit, not yet." So I literally went to go see it yesterday afternoon. So my mind is still like percolating because it's like the politics of the movie are like very complex, actually. And so I hadn't even had a chance to think about like the presence of indigenous people because it's not prominent really in the movie, but as you point that out, Elena, it does actually kind of start with that. And you're right, it that serves as kind of like the foundation for the rest of the movie. And then there are two other places I feel like where indigenous people show up in this movie. The movie isn't about indigenous people. That I think that's important. It's about like the Jim Crow South in the 1930s. I mean, it is a movie about blackness. It's a movie about white supremacy. It's a movie about liberalism. I think it's a movie about the influence of Christianity as like a colonizing and a force of like white supremacy. And so, the movie is not actually about indigenous people per se, although there is indigeneity in the film, whether it is the Choctaw people at the very beginning or like African indigeneity shows up quite a bit through certain moments of like art and culture, music and spirituality throughout the film. So I did want to point that out. But yeah, you're right that I feel like that beginning, that scene that you just described does set a foundation. There is Oh, I already forgot the speech, like, because the movie opens up with is it Annie? I'm not sure, the character of Annie, she's narrating something at the very beginning about there's a lot of spirituality and, like, commentary about spirituality because Sinners, like, the name of the film is Sinners, and so there's a lot about Christianity, really. I feel like a lot of the movie is actually about Christianity, uh, from what I can tell, like an extremely strident critique of Christianity and the normalization of Christianity within possibly like Black culture, and like the really sinister ways that it works through like liberal routes to kind of reproduce conquest, I think. And it'll be interesting to see what your read on that is, Elena. But anyway, so at the very beginning of the film, there are these series of images, and there's like a Choctaw, like pictographs almost or whatever of Choctaw folks, in addition to, if I recall, like images of kind of like, or of like African healers, or maybe like spiritual kind of conduits. And so there is kind of like an intermingling, I would say, of different types of like indigenous spirituality, but not in like a creepy way. Because there is this other point way it's buried. It's like a Easter egg. I felt when kind of like when the climax is happening, when they're about to they're taking on the vampires after they realize that they're vampires, and there's only a few of like the black protagonists who have survived in the juke joint at this point. It's like later on in the evening. So total spoiler alert. I don't know if people know the plot to this movie, but I'm a little bit disorganized with it. I'm assuming a lot of people, because this movie has been like so extremely hyped online. Like I'm assuming people have watched it. Uh, where the OG vampire, the white guy, I don't even remember his name. He's like
Remick,
Ira.
the
What's his name?
Irish guy.
The Irish guy, Remick.
Yeah,
Is that his
Remick.
Remick? Where Remick is confronting Sammy in the water, like right before Remick is about to die, like right before dawn. And Remick is like speaks in tongues, right? So at one point he's like speaking. Are the shop owners Chinese? He's like
Yeah,
speaking, I believe, Chinese, and then he kind of moves back and forth between accents also. And so sometimes his Irish accent comes out, and then other times his like Southern drawl comes out because this movie takes place in Mississippi. And so you just don't really know like who he's being because he's a vampire, right? He can shapeshift essentially. This is like also one of the qualities of a vampire. And so there's this one moment where he's doing this like monologue about what I'm presuming is Christianity in the water. And he says, what does he say? He says, they took our land. Did you catch this, Elena?
Yeah.
When he says this, I actually wrote it down. And you're just like, wait, what is he talking? Is he talking about like how the Irish, like the British took the Irish land? But I don't think that's what was happening in that moment. I think he was actually, there was like it was like a moment of like a breakthrough about Indigenous dispossession in Mississippi, right? Or in that place. And the really fundamental role that Christianity played in conquest. I mean, we all know manifest destiny and the doctrine of discovery. Like the fucking Catholic Church has apologized, for that role, the role of that type of Christianity in conquest. But that's the other moment when I see kind of like a breakthrough about like a more specific Indigenous experience with dispossession or with like the white supremacy that's baked into um, Christianity or Christian institutions as that came here to the so-called New World, and then became the justification for slavery and genocide.
Definitely. I kind of honed more in on Remic's Irish identity because so he's the head vampire. He's the one who runs away, who's running away from the native guys in the very beginning, gets invited into this shack by the woman who opens the door. You find out later they are clanners. Vampire has to be invited in. He is invited in. He turns them into vampires, and you don't quite get that Irishness until they're outside the juke. Then he starts sliding into this Irish accent, and the more vampires he makes, the scene where they're all outside the juke, having been denied entry, they are not invited into the juke. The juke to me represented um, Black culture
Mm-hmm.
and the the sense of ownership that these people Smoke and Stack, who are the twins, both played by Michael Jordan, they want a place. They say it over and over again throughout the beginning of the movie. We want a place where we can celebrate ourselves, or we can be ourselves. So they essentially deny Remick entry into the juke. They're denying whiteness, they're denying white supremacy. And so he starts making vampires of everybody who leaves. And there's this sort of standoff where the juke is still largely black space. And outside, they start dancing the Irish jig and
Yeah, like
playing Irish
intensely.
music. Yeah, it's crazy. And you think about how the Irish were so also dispossessed, and yet Remick has sort of he's using his whiteness as a weapon.
Exactly. Again, because I saw this less than 24 hours ago, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it because it's like, again, very complex, but I couldn't quite figure out what that commentary on Irishness was about. I mean, obviously it has to do with whiteness and it has to do with white supremacy and like the way there's something very the as you move towards the scene, most of the movie takes place when like the black space has been created within the juke joint. It's not like an old sawmill on a plantation, right? I think is what it is. It's sold to them by what you find out is like a very high ranking figure within the clan. Um, and then there's this like kind of incredible scene towards the end of the movie where Michael B. Jordan just like murders all of these clan members and it's like a dream come true moment. Uh but so there's that space of like unapologetic, just completely open freedom, right? Black freedom, where culture and music, people are like, there's sensuality, people are drinking, people are having sex, like they're dancing, they're writhing, they're literally like euphoric, actually, within the juke joint. And there's this incredible scene of like music through the ages and through the generations that happens. And what we can talk about that later. But yeah, it's just this like deep, profound space of like this celebration of Black art and culture and just life, I think, that's happening. Spirituality is also present, various aspects of Black spirituality within the juke joint. And so then that's contrasted. It was almost like a battle, like it's like a battle between like the music, like the whiteness that's happening on the outside of the juke joint that's being led by Remick, and then like what's happening inside the juke joint, because there's like a lot of, obviously there's so much music is so prominent in this film. And so I couldn't understand if there was just kind of like this battle that was going on between like whiteness and blackness, but then also white supremacy and like Black liberation is kind of also what it felt like what was going on. But I don't know what Irishness has to do with that, because I think it is, Elena, what you were saying, that a lot of what happens with like the vampires, to me, certainly represented a whole spectrum of whiteness. Like the different kinds of vampires were engaged in different kinds of whiteness and like the more kind of like subtle liberal forms of white supremacy. So you have the Klan, right, which is just like straight up in your face white supremacy, period, right? Like they're like super obvious. But then the vampires are not, some of them, he turns some Klan members, like you said, into vampires. But once they become vampires, they're no longer Klan members. Then they become these like weird white libs, where at one point the white wife, right, of the two um, white Klan members that he turns at the beginning of the movie as he's being chased by the Choctaws and they let him into their house and then he turns both of them into vampires. At one point, this woman in the movie, she's telling them, as they're like having a conversation, they meaning like Michael B. Jordan and like the other Black characters who are still alive, who won't let, the vampires into the juke joint. There's like only about 6 of them at this point. The main characters who are just trying to like defend the space and stay alive by not letting the vampires in. She stands there and she's like, "We're trying to create a new clan based on love." She says at one point. I was like, "That's the most liberal shit, white liberal shit I've ever heard," right? And and so like that's uh just one aspect, I think, of white liberalism that the vampires represent. Of course, they're turning like Black folks into vampires. And I feel like there's all of this commentary about like the way that like that white liberalism will even seep into those that we would think of as being a part of like our community. This happens in Native communities a lot too. Like Native people who you're like, "Oh, you must be down because you're Native," right? And then you're just like, "Oh shit, no, like you have internalized colonialism, or like you have internalized like white supremacy." And you're like, it's so sinister, it's so sinister in the way that it's like reproducing this and destroying our joy. Like it's destroying Black joy, it's destroying Indigenous joy. And and so I really felt like the vampires were a confluence of like Christianity, white supremacy, and liberalism. And we can talk more about the different ways in which that was manifesting, but yeah.
And I think a really like strong presentation of colonialism and what colonialism does with cultural commodification. And there's the scene where Remick is outside and he and Smoke or Stack, whichever one survived, he says to him, just
Stack. I think
give
Stack
us,
is the one who survived.
Stack's the one who survives, just give us Sammy. So Sammy is the young guy that he's a cousin to Smoke and Stack. And Smoke and Stack have come down from Chicago. They had left Mississippi to go and make their fortunes in Chicago. And they come back down into Mississippi all dressed to the nines, snazzy, with these outfits and car and money to throw around. You find out later that they've actually stolen it and blamed the Italians and the Italians and the Irish mob. So they pit them against each other when they were actually the ones who stole the money. So they bought this juke joint and they go back and they find this cousin of theirs. He's this just amazing musician and
Incredible.
Yeah, incredible.
Incredible
And
musician.
he's playing in the car as they're driving out to the juke joint, and it's like you hear this music and all of a sudden you realize this is this is the transcendence that they're looking for. And Sammy um ends up sort of being the star of the juke joint, and then Perline, who is the woman who also is a singer and shows up. But Remick wants Sammy. Remick wants the music, and he says to Stack, "If you just give him to us, we'll let you all live."
Yep.
You kind of get the idea this is the sort of epitome of Black joy. The Black space and the Blackness is defined by this music, and music within the juke. And even when Sammy first plays for the film, you get this idea that music is so much more than music, that it's like it epitomizes Black culture, it epitomizes liberation, it
Yep.
epitomizes, like you said, joy. It also epitomizes resistance. And
Exactly.
so music is resistance.
Yep.
And there's a scene, Annie, who is this sort of spiritual Black woman that seems to have sort of a healer's quality. Also, she does herbal remedies, and there's a line, and I wrote this down because I think it is so critical to understanding what happens during that 8-minute period of music and dancing. She says, "There are legends of people with the gift of making music so true it conjures spirits from the past and the future." And that's what you see happening when they start playing the music. You see Black Indigenous spiritual beings appear, and then you see like rappers with
Hmm.
electronic equipment, and you see all of these people dancing in this like amazing sort of 8 minutes of no dialogue, nothing but showing these figures dancing and just expressing joy and being who they are, and the past, the present, and the future. And then you see Remick saying, "Just give us Sammy and we'll let the rest of you go." And I wondered at that point if it was, we just want our own cultures back. We just want to be ourselves before colonization. And if you give us Sammy, we can sing that back into existence. And then my mind was blown, because then I went, holy shit, this is like the ghost dance. And the idea
Whoa.
of the ghost dance, which is that we can sing back the buffalo and dance back our lives. And so then I was like really spinning out of control. And but it reminded me so much of just that sort of frenzy that music and dancing in a lot of Indigenous communities, it induces this transcendent state and this altered state of consciousness. And that's what Remick wanted. And he wanted that back for himself. He does say, we are trying to recreate a culture of love and togetherness. We will be our own culture, as in the vampires. But what he really wants is Sammy. He really wants that connection to this individual who can play music so true that it'll bring the past and the future and the present together. And that to me was like, yeah, that's cultural commodification right there, or a way of removing what makes Black culture and taking it away and commodifying it, cannibalizing it
Yeah,
essentially, which is actually what vampires do.
that's the word I was thinking. It's like cannibalizing it. And this is actually helping me now understand like why the Irishness becomes so much more pronounced in Remick's behavior and character as the night wears on or as the movie proceeds, because it's that like desire for white indigeneity that you see in Remick and then in the vampires. And so in order for him to achieve this kind of like what you're saying, this like transcendent moment where it's like, let's just pretend that colonization didn't happen. Like, I don't want, let's pretend that slavery never happened. Like, let's pretend that white supremacy isn't here. Cause I get to do this as a white character, right? Like, I want to have this transcendence. I want to get back in touch with my own indigeneity. But in order to do that, I literally need to steal the indigeneity, right? From, and this is like what, like just that comment of like, just give us Sammy and I'll go. You know, that's where that comes from. And that reminded me, I mean, it reminded me like a lot of Get Out, the Jordan Peele movie, because it's like literally trying to wear the skins or like steal the souls of Black folks, right? And like this is what like whiteness does, right? In order to have its own purchase within like the past, present, and future, to have like a continuity, that ancestral continuity that, you know, Annie is narrating when she's talking about the power of music, like the power of Black music. Because what whiteness does, what colonization has done, right? Like what slavery did, right? Like basically the US, like the founding of the US did. And also what Christianity does is it disrupts that continuity. It purposefully steals souls in service of colonialism, in service of capitalism, in service of imperialism. And so it disrupts that continuity. It literally stops the continuity. It tries to kill that continuity, that temporal continuity across like time and space, the past, present, and the future. And so here you have Remick who's like desperately trying to reclaim that continuity, that sense of indigeneity for himself by yet again stealing the souls of Black folks, right? And this is also what pretendians do. This was a moment where I was really thinking like, um, it's like an extremely, and then using like trauma, they use music, they use trauma, they use like every trick in the book from like white liberalism, kindness, love. They're talking about fellowship. They're like, we're going to create one big family. You know, we're just going to like lull you into coming out with our beautiful folksy music, our Irish folk music. At one point, Haley Seinfeld's character, who we need to talk about, she's an interesting character when she goes out because she's like white. She's white passing. She's like a white passing Black woman, I get. Anyway, it was really weird. She's like a fucking weird character, so creepy. But you know, at one point she goes out to kind of, she's like the diplomat, you know, when the vampires originally show up at the juke joint, because she's like, they'll talk to me, obviously, because she's white. And she goes out there and she talks to them, and they're immediately trying to get her to like talk about her trauma because her mom has just passed away. You find out at the beginning of the movie that her mom has just passed away. And so they're trying to like get her to lower her guard by engaging with trauma discourse, which is also like on brand for white liberalism, right? And so you have all of these like subtle manipulative ways in which the vampires, if the vampires represent a certain type of white supremacy, which I think that they do, they represent like the liberal kind of aspect of white supremacy. They're engaged in all of these different mechanisms of manipulation. And that desire, that like white desire, because shit, man, like the only reason why settlers be here is because like they don't belong here. They're not from this place, right? They're not from this place. Like you can't claim indigeneity to a land that you stole. You just can't. And so you are like forever alienated. And the only way that you can claim relationality with the place is through conquest, is through ownership, is through possession, which is also what slavery was. That's also what that was and is, and the continued legacy of white supremacy in the United States. And so you have Remick who's trying to be like, I don't want to be a part of that. Like, he wants to like, I think he represents like a certain type of like whiteness or like a white settler subjectivity that wants to like cast that off and be like, I don't want that to be my legacy, you know? And so then they engage in all of these extremely fucked up forms of like liberal co-optation of Blackness or of indigeneity, right? To disavow the fact and the truth at the heart of who they are and how they came to be, and the fact that they are still here. on stolen land, on land that has literally been soaked in the blood of Black and Indigenous people. Literally, that is the foundation of this country. And so he knows, like Remick knows, that he cannot reclaim his humanity, i.e., his indigeneity, without Sammy. And even actually, there's this moment when Grace, one of the Chinese shop owners, like she's part of like the coalition of resistance inside the juke joint with like the Black protagonists. She, like the vampires are threatening to go and kill her daughter, and so she invites them in because she's like, come on, motherfuckers. She's like ready to take them on, it's because she doesn't want them to kill her daughter. And so then the fight ensues, like the very first big fight scene. And Annie, the spiritual, um, this like incredibly like perceptive, powerful Black woman who is Smoke. So I think it's actually Smoke who survives, not Stack. I'm so sorry. Or no, Smoke died. Smoke dies at the end, but Stack becomes the vampire. I apologize to folks if I'm getting this wrong. But her love interest is Smoke, correct? Annie and Smoke are the ones. They had a baby together.
Yeah. Who
Okay.
died. Yes.
So in this battle, right, it's like 6 against 40 or something at this point. Like the odds are really low, right, that they're gonna be able to stave off these vampires. Annie gets bit, and she tells Smoke ahead of time. She's like, if this happens, she's like, I need you to stab me in the heart, so like I don't become one of them. And so there's this moment when he does do that, and it's a very pivotal moment in the film. And then I think is it Remick? It's Mary. Her name's Mary. Haley Seinfeld's character. Uh, they scream in the moment where he kills Annie before she can turn into a vampire, because they're like, we had plans for her. Like, why did you take her from us? And she's like this, like, for lack of a better term, like the spiritual interlocutor of like Black spirituality in the film. And so even then you can see like the vampires really, really want Annie, and they really, really want Sammy, because both Annie and Sammy represent, right, that like you said, that place of like profound like Black joy, freedom, the continuity, like what makes the wellspring of resistance and just vibrant life, right? And they want to take it and they want to use it for themselves, and they're like their redemption narrative for whiteness. And it's, and like this is what the vampires I think represent in the movie. This movie's brilliant. I'm like, the politics of this are just really good.
Yeah. It is. It is brilliant. It's brilliant, like down to every detail. And I agree. I hadn't thought about Sammy and Annie as the two, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, um, she represents sort of the earthiness um, and um, the continuity of um, culture and of living, through the earth, and her little shack where she hands out remedies to people, and Sammy sort of represents the transcendence of music and this idea of um, of joy, that can bring a connection to the past and the future. The ancestors, even as far back as Africa, and the descendants who, will not be for another 100 years. But so if they represent sort of the Black liberation and the Black strength, then Smoke and Stack are like the warriors.
Yeah.
And
That word is used actually multiple times to describe them in the movie.
yeah. Wow. Excuse me. So like, I just had a thought too, which kind of blows my own mind. I'm blowing my own mind. Like the warrior twins. We've got the warrior twins here, represented by Smoke and Stack, and the idea that they are the ones who've come back um, from Chicago, and people keep asking them, why did you come back? And they want to create space. Well, they came back also because they were unwelcome in Chicago any longer, but there's a line, and I forget who said it, but one of them says, Chicago is just like Mississippi, but with taller buildings.
Yeah, that's exactly,
Um,
yep.
Meaning that although they escaped Jim Crow South, what they found in Chicago wasn't that different. I mean, the Great Migration, in many cases, just led to people taking with them what they had in Mississippi, and building new neighborhoods and building in new areas, but essentially what they took with them was exactly who they were. And so there's this sense that they have come back to try to sort of liberate Mississippi. I think Ryan Coogler sort of checks off all the boxes in many ways to show just how awful Jim Crow South was. And with the Chinese shopkeepers, you have this idea of different sides of the road in this town, where black people couldn't shop in white owned shops. They were not welcome, and white people would never go to a black owned shop, and black people couldn't own property anyway. So this is where you have the Asians come in. You have the Asians come in because they can own property, they can sell to both white people and black people. And then you have Sammy, whose father is the preacher, and he wants to go and play music, but because he's a sharecropper, which is basically a slave without being a slave, he has to work through the night to make his quota in order to have the time off to go play music. So it's sort of shining a light on all of these horrific things that made up Jim Crow South, but it's doing it sort of subtly. Like, if you're not familiar with what the reality was in Jim Crow South, it's pretty horrific. And then I just wanted to go back because I thought also, like, the way they use color. Like, you talk about that first scene and you talk about Christianity, and you have this little black church in the middle of nowhere, and all these people are in this church, and all of these people are wearing white. So you have all of these black people dressed in white inside this whitewashed church. And, like, Christianity forced this whiteness onto black people and native people in order to assimilate, acculturate, and basically remove all of our own culture. And then in bursts Sammy, who is this like figure, this transcendent figure. And his father tells him, you find out later on, his father tells him, all you have to do is give up the music, stop playing music. In other words, don't think about your past, don't think about your future. Disassociate yourself, dispossess yourself from anything having to do with your culture, and it'll be okay. We'll welcome you back into this white ass church with these people wearing white clothes. And then you find out at the end, he chooses not to do that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
He never lets go of the guitar. His dad keeps trying to get him to let go of this guitar. This guitar is also like a protagonist. This steel guitar that he has with him throughout literally throughout the entire film. I think he has it. Well, it's not in his arms most of the time, the entire time, but most of the time it is. And because that very first scene is 30 hours later, it's when Sammy is like, when he enters the church in that scene, he's like covered in blood. He has a big old slash, like claw marks across his face that you later find out Remick does, kind of in that moment where Remick's like trying to baptize him, in those final moments before Remick dies. And so Sammy's just like destroyed. He's like covered in blood. And he is like, he's walking into the space, right? The church, it's pristine. Like you said, like everyone's just like dressed in clean pressed, like perfectly crisp whiteness inside this church. And his guitar has been completely destroyed. He only has the handle, not the handle, whatever it's called. I apologize, whatever the fret. Only the fret is left of the guitar because it's been completely destroyed by like their battles to survive, the battles to like literally maintain their blackness, after these vampires are trying to cannibalize and destroy like their black liberation, their freedom, and their joy. And so Sammy enters the space, and that is a moment where that is honest. Like how he looks, he's embattled, he is covered in blood. That right there is literally lifting the veil of like liberal whiteness. Because what liberalism does, right, is it uses all of this bullshit. And like these vampires say all of these crazy things throughout the course of the movie, where it's like, we're going to create a new clan based out of love, right? Or they're like, we're one big happy family. We're going to become one big family together. Cornbread, who's like a black character, who's like he's managing the door for them. He ends up getting turned into a vampire. And at one point after he's a vampire, he says, we're supposed to be kind to one another. We are one people, right? So all of this liberal bullshit that you hear all the time, when they're dancing outside, like after Remick has turned, and then the other vampires have turned each other, it reminded me of this like bullshit, like rainbow multicultural coalition of vampires. So there was like a neoliberal multiculturalism too, I think that the vampires represented. So it's like the trauma politics. It's like the pretendianism, right? It's like the cultural commodification. It's the what most people call cultural appropriation, but I really just think that's just like racism, right? There's all of these there's like killing you with kindness. There's like the manipulation of trying to lure you out with like the promise of Christianity, right? There are all of these like vicissitudes and different like tactics of white liberalism that the vampires represent. And so you have that like scene where Sammy enters the church and he's like, you know what? This right here. And I think that this is what sorry, what's the director's name again? Ryan
Coogler,
Coogler.
Ryan Coogler.
Ryan Coogler. I think this is where he's like using the symbolism of being drenched in blood, and just kind of like destroyed, and how that there's only one shred of joy, like black joy and freedom still left, and like Sammy's gripping it. And it's like this right here. No, this is what liberalism is. Liberalism is bullshit. All of this stuff that these vampires are saying to you is just a thin veil to cover the KKK. It's just a thin veil, right, to cover what's actually going on here, which is the sheer brutality of white supremacy. Like Sammy has endured and survived the sheer brutality of white supremacy in that moment. And it just pierces that veil immediately. And the fact that he refuses his father, and you find kind of like the very last 5 to 10 minutes of the film are Sammy's story into the future. You literally see him driving away out of the plantation, still gripping the guitar. And then all of a sudden you fast forward to 1992, right at the end of the film, and he's an old man. He's on stage playing. I think he still has the same guitar, right?
Yep.
And there's like this very fascinating exchange. He goes to a bar after a performance one night, and Mary, Haley Seinfeld's character, and then Stack, who I think became a vampire. They're like together. They're still vampires, but they come in, they find him, they come in, and they have this conversation.
I think it's his bar. I think.
Oh, it's his bar. Okay, maybe I
think
missed
it's
that
his
because I was
bar. I
taking
think he
notes.
flees to Chicago.
Yes, he's in Chicago. Sorry, it's
He's
1992
in Chicago, and I think it's his bar. The bartender, because I remember thinking the bartender says to him, "There's two people. They just want to come in and see you real quick." And I'm thinking, "Oh God, here we go." But anyway, carry on.
No, and so they have this like very interesting exchange, and something that Sammy says, like one of the very last things that he says, and the movie ends after that, is he's like, that night, right? Thinking back to 1936, 1932, whenever the movie takes place, the juke joint battle
Yeah.
with the vampires 60 years earlier. He's like, whenever I think about that night, I think he says it paralyzes me. He's like, but also it was like the best night of my life, is what he
Yeah.
says.
Yep.
And then Stack, Michael B. Jordan's vampire character, says, yeah, for me too, it was the best night of my life. And you think that he's talking about what becoming a vampire. Like you have this like thing where it's like, oh yeah, he's saying like it was the best thing in for him to become a vampire, but then he says in those few hours we were free.
We
Or
were
he says
free.
something like that. He says we were free. And you're like, oh, he's actually not talking about becoming a vampire. He's talking about those few hours in the juke joint when they were truly free to like be themselves, right? That space of profound like Black joy and music and art and culture and celebration and liberation and freedom. And there are so many moments where, like the Black protagonist in the movie, the word free happens a lot. People use that word a lot in the movie. And there's so much commentary, right, about what is freedom? Like, what is freedom? What is liberation? And Sammy's story, like, Sammy has a future. He's the only character who has a future, who comes out of that entire encounter, that fateful night at the juke joint, who has a future. And of course, he's like the musician, right? He's the one who keeps that going. Like that quote, that beautiful quote that you read earlier, Elena, that Annie says in the movie, about like how music transcends like the past and present and the future. And so Sammy like embodies that kind of freedom. And then that freedom is found in that like unbreakable continuity. Sammy didn't let them in, because the vampires, you have to let them in, right? In order for them to have an influence on you or to turn you. And like Sammy didn't let them in. And like I think that's like an important message of the film. It's like, don't let it in.
Yeah.
Don't let this bullshit in. Don't let like this white liberalism in, because it will disrupt and destroy. The whole purpose of that, right, is to disrupt and destroy the transcendence of that continuity. And it is that continuity that is the space of our survival and our resistance and like our the integrity of who we are, right, as Black folks. And I would argue this is very similar, I would say, for Indigenous folks too. And even as a vampire, because Haley Seinfeld's character, this white girl, she's the one who turns Stack so that he'll be with her, and she's still with him in 1992. And so she's the one who turns him, and she takes away his freedom so that she can have him to herself, right? To fulfill her own, like, because she has this creepy moment where she's talking to him in the juke joint, where she says, what does she say? So her grandfather was half Black, is what she says. She says, my mama's daddy was half Black, and then I missed this part. Someone so raised her white, I'm assuming, to protect her from the Klan. And this is after Sammy asks her, like, what are you? And then there's this moment where Mary, Haley Seinfeld's character, is talking to Stack. And she says, I didn't want to be with no white man or something like that, because he, I guess, set up a marriage with her. I think she says, I didn't want to be white. I wanted to be with you. Right. And so creepy, so creepy. But she's basically this like white woman who steals Stack's future. She literally ends his future so that she can have her like weird fantasy of like being Black and being with a Black man. And 60 years later, she's still with him. And for him, in that moment in 1992, when he's like seeing Sammy again for the first time in a long time, he doesn't even acknowledge her really. He says, he looks back and he's like, that was the time of my life, those few hours before I became a vampire, when I was truly free, you know? And so, yeah, I guess all I'm saying is that like this commentary on like, don't let it in. Don't let it in. And that's how liberalism works. Like it is operating and doing its job of reproducing, and like it's getting its claws in deeper and deeper into you in moments when you don't even know. It happens on the most subtle of registers. It's incredibly manipulative. Like this is what biopolitics describes. It's affective. It's the things that are so ingrained in our very like subjectivity and our personalities, right? The things that we assume to be normal about ourselves. And I truly feel like this film is like, no, like, don't let it in. Understand when it's at work on all of these different ways. You have to be able to identify it and see it clearly. Like Annie's the person in the movie who's like trying to figure out who these people are. And she's the one who's finally like, these are some goddamn vampires. Like, that's what's going on here. She's like the conscience. She's like the consciousness like raising of the film. And once she's finally like that, she's like, okay. She's like, now that we know who these motherfuckers are, we got to kill them. Like, not only do we not let them in, but we have to destroy them. And we have to destroy that within ourselves as well to truly be free.
Yeah. And she has the courage to say that. If I get bit, you have to kill me.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I thought was interesting too is that, like, the very last time you see Smoke and Stack together, Stack has been turned, and Smoke um, has a stake at his heart, and then the camera cuts away. So I assumed that he'd killed him, that he'd killed his twin, and then at the end when they're sitting in the bar with Sammy, um, and Sammy says something like, I knew he couldn't kill you, or something like that. And then Stack says, yeah, he didn't kill me. He made me promise not to hurt you. And so I'm, think now when you're talking about like liberalism and letting it in, I think that Annie had the courage to say, if it gets in me, kill me. I don't want it. I don't want this disease. Whereas Smoke and Stack, it was like they weren't quite sure how to deal. They were very pragmatic, and so Stack lived with this in two ways. He lived with this disease that he had, this vampirism, but he also lived with the woman, and you see how like literally, um, you have to either kill it or um, or die yourself, in order to cure yourself of it. So yeah, interesting.
And you have to actively resist it. This is the other thing I felt was so clear in like the fight when they're clearly outnumbered. Like the odds of them living are very slim, right? As they're defending the juke joint after Grace invites the vampires in. But it's like you have to actively resist it. You have to see it. You have to see it clearly for what it is, right? You have to understand it, you have to see it, you have to be brave enough to identify it within yourself. You have to be willing to destroy it again, like structurally, but also within yourself. And then you have to actively resist it because every single day, it's like every single day, like the whole world is structured like according to white supremacy. It is literally everywhere. I also feel this way all the time about heteropatriarchy and like colonialism. It is literally everywhere. You have to be you have to be like militantly committed as a person and as a human being to like resisting that shit because it is so hyper normalized. It is so seductive. I wouldn't say it's powerful in a way, but like yeah, you have to actually understand what's going on and you have to see it clearly and you have to resist it and you have to destroy it. And that right there is like, I don't know. That's like just to maintain your humanity, right? Just to maintain the integrity of who you are as, black folks or like indigenous folks. And I that felt really clear to me
Yeah.
in this film. Again, just like some good politics. Better, much better than Wakanda Forever. That was a mess. Politically, that movie was a mess.
That was a mess, and I that was another one of those films where I went to see it and I was like, what did they do?
No.
But this, I mean, it had, I think, the benefit of surprise, the element of surprise. I didn't know what I was getting into, but then it was like every scene, it was sort of building on this idea of um, what the vampires represented, what Remick represented, what um, the black characters were so well drawn, even though none of them had that much screen time. I mean, individually, like even Cornbread um, didn't have that much time, but you remembered his name, and um, and uh, like just the who they were as people, and what they represented in terms of blackness, but also what they represented in terms of just humanity and being human, was just amazing. And then the Klan, man, the Klan were just like the guy they bought the juke joint from, or the what was the old sawmill, and one of the brothers says to him, "Well, you're not Klan, are you?" And there's no Klan here. Klan's been died out for a long time. And I was thinking to myself when he said that, I was like, I don't think so. And sure enough, the guy ended up being like a grand dragon or something. But just the idea that white supremacy also tried to disguise itself, and white supremacy tries to disguise itself and is insidious through this idea of liberalism. And um and that's what, that's what they were doing, is pretending to be okay with having these black brothers bring this juke joint into this sawmill, but ultimately they were already planning on killing them and burning the whole thing down. And then Smoke turned it over and went like full out Rambo on him, which was great. It was a great scene. I usually, I'm like kind of closing my eyes when there's a lot of blood and gore, but this time I was like, yes, get those motherfuckers.
It's funny you said he went full out Rambo because he's the main character in Creed. Which also
Yeah.
Ryan Coogler directed and wrote.
Yep.
There was that subtle moment too, like that box they pull out of the back of the truck where you find out that Smoke is preparing to take out all of the KKK because he knows that they're coming in the morning. And those look like World War I hats. And so then you're just like, wait, these brothers are warriors. They literally have also
Yeah.
fought in a war.
Yep.
Like, and that's like, he still has like the whatever those guns are called, like the rapid fire, like
The howitzers.
yep,
Yeah.
he still has those. And so that was just also just another Easter egg moment where it's like, dang, like they have truly these brothers, like what they represent, I think in terms of like freedom and liberation and that spirit of resistance and fight, um, was like also very interesting. Yeah, and
And
then
like,
he takes out all the KKK and you're
yep.
just and he dies in the process. He dies in
Yeah.
the process. But it's kind of a glorious moment.
It is a glorious moment. And when you think like, um, black people in America also were not considered citizens. The same way Native people who served in the military, you can serve and die for this, colonial project, but you can't vote in an election. And it was the same for black people. So it is one of those moments where you just have to stop and think about it.
I wanted to say one more thing about the title of the movie, Sinners. Sinners. Uh, like the vampires, this is literally what liberalism does. It's just like the most epic gaslight ever, right? They're all trying to like make black joy, right? The what's going essentially what is happening inside the juke joint. And they're basically being like, you're being sinful. Look at all this sin. Or like Sammy's dad, the preacher, he's also like basically like music is sinful, like what you do is dancing is sinful, like sex and drinking is sinful. And like the brothers, Smoke and Stack, like their whole story, they could easily be read as like extremely amoral. They're gangsters, they stolen money. They like shoot two people at the very beginning of the movie for trying to steal from them, right? Um, they're like morally bankrupt, quote unquote, from that kind of like white Christian perspective. And then what everything that transpires and happens within the juke joint could be considered sinful. And I think like what the movie is also trying to say is like that is total bullshit. Like that is a total gaslight. Like this isn't sin. This is who we are. This is like our source of strength. Like this is how we survive. Like this is where we come from and we should not be ashamed of it. We should embrace it. And we
Yeah.
should understand that this Christianity and like whiteness and liberalism, like this is the bullshit and this is the real threat, to our very existence,
Yeah.
as a people. And
Well, and then look at as they're driving when they first have Sammy and he's playing in the car, or the truck, um, and they're driving by the chain gang, and you think to yourself, like, yes, slavery has been abolished, um, except as a punishment for whatever it is that Black people do that makes them prisoners and be placed on a chain gang, like loitering or being unhoused or public drunkenness. And then it's perfectly okay to enslave them in these chain gangs and force them to work once again for no money, which is slavery. Um, so you see the juxtaposition really clear. Like, what Smoke and Stack do or have done is to protect themselves and their people, and what the um, what the Klan and what almost all of the white people in the film are doing is protecting capitalism, protecting their financial interests. Which, hey, big surprise, right?
Whiteness as property, like
Yep.
that's really also, I think, a strong through line. Um, Cheryl Harris's Whiteness as Property obviously influenced this film and its politics. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, thinking about incarceration, obviously. And so there was all of this other, like, I feel like I don't know if that's the Black radical tradition. That actually comes from, I think, a more leftist space. But there is this entire like canon or this world of Black intellectual, political, and cultural influence that you kind of feel if you are aware of those things that are very obviously inform the film and the way that the narrative is constructed and like the political messaging of the film. And I remember we talked, when we've talked about like res dogs in the past, like res dogs also feels like that for like native folks in terms of like native pop culture, because it's so self-referential, like it's literally drawing from an entire canon of not only like native pop culture but also like intellectual and cultural and political vibrancy, like the things that are life for us. And it that the word tradition comes to my mind, but not in like the conservative Christian way, right? Where it's like where Christians think that you're engaging in sin when you're violating their fucked up traditions, but their traditions are really just about upholding whiteness as property, right? Those
Yep.
traditions are just about upholding like the right of men to own women through the institution of marriage, right? And those kinds of things. Or your right to have property, and that like ownership is really central as like a Christian value, right? The way that that's translated in under white supremacy and settler colonialism in the United States. And so the word tradition, and music is a tradition. Music is a tradition. It's like a legacy that's passed down generationally as well. And so I think a lot about, or I've been think about the way in which like those Black traditions of, I don't know, excellence isn't the right word. It's like how we were talking about res dogs, how there's like these traditions, the canon of like vibrant native cultural and intellectual and political production informing that show as an expression of that, I felt was also very present in Sinners.
Yeah.
Um, and that was also dope. I mean, smart, just so smart, really meta.
Yep.
Again, a type of celebration in and of itself, like a demonstration of like the strength and the fortitude and the power, like the power of those traditions, um, and that genealogy.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, although I'm sure this film was in production long before the last presidential election, but I think it's interesting that it came out during a time when so many institutions are rolling back the DEIB initiative, and no one's talking about DEIB because it's become so heavily politicized and it's such a liberal trope. But um, this film, above all, I think shows that what Jim Crow South was like, really not much has changed. And um, it's not so much in Jim Crow South. Black people could not own property and could not own businesses. There were various laws, many of which weren't even repealed until the 1980s, against miscegenation in the South, actually throughout, across this country. Um, but when you look at it now, what we're looking at, what's going on in this country, like nothing's really changed. It's just been glossed over by liberalism. It's all been just, whitewashed and hidden. But, they're pulling back the curtains now, and you can see that this is pretty much the same country as it was in 1932, 36, whatever.
I read an article, I forgot where it was, and this was like a few months ago, about how, like, if you actually look at the context whenever like white, um, like far right people use the term DEI, they're like, you just put in the word like African American or black into that. And because like what they're actually saying is it's just like they're repackaging like a new form of anti-blackness and making it like literally formulating new policies and laws, anti-black policies and laws. They're using the term DEI, but that's really what it's really about. It's really just a doubling down and a reinforcement on legalized white supremacy.
Yeah.
And I was like, this right here. Um, and so, yeah, again, like I think this film coming out in this particular historical and political moment, uh, significant to say
Yeah.
the least.
Definitely significant, and definitely like you couldn't have paid for better timing.
Hmm. Well, I we do a lot, obviously we do pop culture, it's like our thing or whatever on RPH, and I love it because I consume I consume a lot of pop culture and I enjoy a lot of it. And we're obviously like very critical a lot of the time about all the things, even the things that we love. But I'm like a scholar, I'm a historian, I'm like highly theoretical. Like this is the work that I do, and I engage in politics. I don't often engage in the realm of cultural production, really. Even though we would critique it and I consume it, I don't really like produce it that much, I would say. Um, and there is such that said, even though I don't necessarily do it, not that I will never do it, it's so obvious, especially given I'm even thinking back at like Kendrick Lamar's performance at the Super Bowl also back in January. And just like this emphatic celebration of blackness. It was like a total boner slicer moment because Trump was in the crowd. And it was just like brilliant. Um, and there's something about this movie that feels very similar. And so there is such an important role that culture plays in politics and even though there's like such an intense effort, like the entire US state is putting its whole back into destroying and repressing and censoring, and just like killing any of this like cultural production. The fact that it is still like going so hard and people are still going so hard. Like Sinners is like one of the most highly rated movies I've ever seen on Rotten Tomatoes, for example. Like people love this movie. Like millions of people love this movie. And so there's something really there's joy. I think there's a lot of joy and like very genuine hope with like the messages of resistance that can be found. Um yeah, even in moments where it feels like you're losing, I guess. You're losing the struggle for liberation. Or those are like serious not backpedaling, but yeah,
Yeah,
all
I
the gains
agree.
you're making are being peeled back.
I agree. It's really unapologetic and in your face, but also for orangutans like those people in Washington. Apologies to orangutans, which are much more intelligent than those people in Washington.
Orangutans are beautiful.
Orangutans are beautiful. I should use a different those. I don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
Those idiot orange clouds in Washington. Package it up as a vampire and they won't know what the hell they're watching. Like, they're not going to get it. Like, they're too stupid. And so you've got a brilliant ass movie about Black liberation, and Black is beautiful, and music has resistance, and we all have the right to joy. We all have the right to transcendence, and we all, our basic human right to belonging to the place we came from, and we have a right to defend at all costs those rights. But you package it up with a little bit of vampire and some Irish jig, and people don't, none of those nasty ass Republican, whatever, all politicians in Washington are going to get any of it. So it's like subversive, and as well as just in your face. In both, it can be both. It's both.
Yeah, you're right. It is both. It's both subversive and super obvious. I tend to just be on like the super obvious frequency. I'm not terribly subversive. Because I just like will always just say it how it is. But culture, this is what I'm saying. Culture and art. Culture and art serves the role of being like both super obvious, but also very subversive and just completely like packed with meaning that you get to unpack, as you interact with it. And that's the brilliance of art. Yep. This movie is a work of art.
It is, and I think it's going to be one that we can reflect back on many times in the next years, because I was impressed. I was definitely impressed with Ryan Coogler. I think after Wakanda Forever, I was like, oh God. But now, I mean, he's redeemed himself for sure.
Well, I feel like we did this movie justice. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a news roundup kind of episode. Or this might air. We might do the news roundup episode and then this might air after that. So anyway, RPH will be back on a regular schedule. And thanks everyone so much for listening. I know that there are people have lots of thoughts, and I think lots of really brilliant takes and analyses and even criticisms of Sinners. And so I hope this has just added to that conversation that y'all are having with each other. But yeah, we'll be back soon, and goodbye for now.